pleased to introduce to you Hamid Tehrani. Today he's going to speak on Iranian anti-Semitism and the internet. Mr. Tehrani is a blogger on the internet dealing with issues of Iran, Iranian society, and the opposition movement in Iran. And on Friday, if you remember, Professor Davin Menashri was here, and he was speaking about the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran, and also the possibilities and sort of the status, if you will, of the opposition movement in Iranian society. And Hamid Tehrani is going to speak about this today from a very, I guess, a different perspective, somebody who's very much a part of and in contact with Iranian opposition movements. He's currently based in Europe, and he's a researcher on Iranian society. He's a journalist and a blogger. He's the Persian editor of the Harvard Global Voices, a multi-prize winning media project that covers citizenship media worldwide. He collaborates with different civil society and digital media projects and organizations, such as G-Active, a volunteer-based organization dedicated to helping grassroots activists around the world to use the internet and mobile phones to increase impact on society. Currently, he's engaged in writing a research proposal on the roots of anti-Semitism in Iranian society. He's been a speaker in different international conferences on citizenship, media, and its impact on civil society in Europe, the United States, and Central Asia. He's been interviewed several times by major international media organizations, such as recently by the BBC. He's published various articles in Persian, English, French, and Italian, and he is the founder of Sounds of Iran, a community for researchers on Iranian blogs. So it's really a pleasure to have him today.
Well, the voice it's on, microphones? Okay. It's a very pleasure to be here. It's an honor. I think everybody says the same thing, standing here. And it's a very sensitive topic to talk about Iranian anti-Semitism in these days. And usually I like to go to conferences to talk about Iranian civil society and how internet has positive impact on civil rights movement, women's, students, activists, and so on. And each time I should precise that please take in consideration that all Iranian internet is not about opposition, about democracy, and about human rights. There are conservatives that reject all of these values. Today, I should start my talk by saying completely opposite of it. It sounds a little bit like a politician here, but please take in consideration that Iranian bloggers and anti-Semitic blogs don't represent Iranian population, and even not Iranian Islamists. It's a small group, but it's a very active group, and it organizes itself. Another remark is, talking about anti-Semitism in these days, without mentioning Iranian president and its activity, it looks like a blasphemy. And during the last 3 years, Hamid Tehrani, if you follow Iranian politics, denied Holocaust, and he organized conferences in Iran, invited neo-Nazis, and there was even a cartoon competition about Holocaust, and they call it an answer to Danish cartoons. And it's amazing that after all these 3 years, if you look at how many studies, articles written about anti-Semitism in Iran, you get really disappointed. It's not many, just a few. Before I started to work on this topic, I contacted about 7 or 8 different Iranian or non-Iranian scholars and academics working on Iran from different perspectives, like history, sociology, and other things, and they said they don't see any article on it. I'm amazing why. Maybe Ahmadinejad is just like a tree that hides in a forest. I mean, Ahmadinejad didn't invent anti-Semitism in Iran and didn't bring anything new. He just expressed himself and whatever many other people whispered, and he gave a lot of credit to to this movement in country. And one of my friends who has a very good sense of humor, he told me, I'm going to waste your time to talk about Iranian anti-Semitism on the internet for half an hour. I just need to show you a photo of Iranian president in front of a computer sending an email, and it explains everything. But unfortunately, it's much more complicated than that. And by looking at the blogs, anti-Semitic blogs, we can find out a little bit more about this farce. First, look at why internet is important in Iran. Well, Iran has about 70 million population. At least 18 million of them are connected to internet. According to official statistics, it's about 23 million, and it's a lot. There is a lot of filtering, but internet movement goes on, and people find different ways to get information into sites and pass information and organizes different movements. According to Harvard study, Berkman Center study, about 60,000 updated blogs exist in Persian, in Farsi. And some of these blogs have become an instrument into the hands of civil society movement to organize themselves, to inform other people, and to publish photos or videos from demonstrations or other things. They don't have any access to TV, to radio, and to newspapers, and there's only instrument in their hands. And more politicians, day by day, are blogging, and the last one was probably Ahmadinejad's advisor, who started to blog. He himself blogs once per 4 or 5 months. But everything is not that good. I mean, on the other side, we have other bloggers and people who use internet to advocate their own ideology that has nothing to do with democracy or human rights or civil society values. And among them, you find, of course, anti-Semitic bloggers. Here it is. It's very great image. It looks like, Star Wars. And it's Berkman Center started to do this study. They started to use software and studied 60,000 of different blogs. And Bruce Ethnic and John Curry did that for Berkman Center. And you have the reformist and secular ones, and you have other side, the red ones and blue ones and yellow ones are conservative ones. Among them, you can find anti-Semitic bloggers, but as I said, most of anti-Semitic bloggers are Islamists, but most Islamists are not anti-Semitic. And of course, you can find among secular ones, other anti-Semitic ones. They are ultra-nationalists who reject at the same time Arabs, Islam, and Jewish population. Their roots, there are only a minority of them, of course. Their roots go back to World War II. There was a fascist party in Iran, and they just, a souvenir of that old time, but they don't have influence. Al-Homad is a conservative anti-Semitic blog, if we are going to talk about it. Each dot shows the blog, and more it is bigger, it means more links are given to it. Okay, now let's go to the heart of the topic. We are going to look at what they are talking about, how they represent Jewish population in these anti-Semitic blogs. And we will see it's not about really Israel and Palestinian conflict, or it is not about the Jewish minority in Iran. They feel that they have a kind of universal mission against a kind of evil, and it goes beyond benign time. There are three different rhetorics to justify their attitude and their ideology. One of them is Islamist anti-Semitism, and Iranian ones have it in common with the Arab ones because they use some verses and some hadiths. Hadiths is traditionally the oral related to prophet deeds and actions, and verses that come from Quran. But you can do exactly the same thing with Bible. You can go to some verses to justify your attitude. It's not the source that is the problem, but people who are going after that are the problems. There are the Islamist anti-Semitism that they use that. I just give some examples. I read it for you. It's repeated a lot among different blogs. They cite a single verse of the Quran. It's a surah, one section of Quran, Ma'idah verse 83, that says, Jews and infidels are the worst enemies of Muslims. And you see in many of these blogs use this verse as a key verse, and then they conclude that learning about this absolute enemy is a duty for each of us. And there is another different stories coming from old tradition of Muslim thinkers to justify their attitude. One of these blogs called Yahud Shenaz, it means knowing the Jews, refers to the writing of 7th century influential cleric Majlisi to expose so-called Jewish hostility to the will of God and Muhammad the Prophet. This one is important because they refer to this story to say that Jews were enemies even before Muhammad the Prophet comes to power and becomes anointed by God. According to Majlisi, Jews wanted to kill Abdullah, the Prophet's father, to prevent his birth, but they failed. But the blogger adds that Jews are responsible for the suspicious death of Abdullah. It means that time's dimension is really, it's everywhere. It's from before Islam, it starts, and it goes on at Prophet's time, and it continues to today, and it goes to the future. One of them says, warns Muslims that according to one hadith, no Jew doesn't want to be alone with a Muslim except to kill him. You can find very irrational things, but some of them have been written for centuries, and they just go to dig it up, and they just use that to justify their Islamist rhetoric for their ideology. The second part is Iranian anti-Semitism. I think it's the most innovative thing that Iranian anti-Semitic did so far. They tried to restudy Iranian history and to find and to stories that show the Jewish population have been enemies not to Muslims alone, but to Iranian population too. And sometimes they go and they look for these stories into the Bible. One of the favorite stories is Esther's story. In the book of Esther, you know how the vizier of Iranian Persian king wants to kill Jews, and Esther learned about it. She is the wife of the king. She talks about the story, and the king orders the murdering of Haman, his vizier, his minister, and many others. In the Bible, we read that about 75,000 people were murdered who were considered the enemies of Jews. It's very interesting that Iranian Islamists who say all the time that the Bible is not a reliable source for anything, they refer to this story to say a genocide happened against Iranians by Jewish population and by Jewish conspiracy and Esther. There are other ones that started to retrace the important Jewish prominent figures in Iranian history, and they start to label them as some One of them was Samuel is a Jewish physician and statesman in 13th century in Iran. At the same time, at that time, Iran was under control of a Mongolian leader, and this Jewish statesman was his advisor. And one of these bloggers called himself Al-Hadid, who is very active in writing about these stories. He said he advised the king to attack, to invade Mecca and turn Kaaba into idolatry center. Of course, they don't refer to any historical facts to justify their claims, but either they said it happened, or one happened, but it was planned, or it was said. But the point is that looking into Iranian story and revisioning it to justify their attitudes is kind of a sacred rhetoric to for Iranian anti-Semitism and Iranian anti-Semitic bloggers. Of course, they come into the current history too. They talk about Iranian Jewish population sometimes, not many times. And they consider, they say, some of them are involved with Hollywood, and just some of them played in the Crash movie, and they gave a very negative image of Iranians altogether. The third one that is, I think, is less significant, and you can find anywhere, we can call it casual anti-Semitism. They just imported Western revisionism and Western ideas and just translate that. It's denial of Holocaust, of course, it's the protocol of elders of Zion, and it's dehumanizing of Jewish population by saying they have always been greedy people or hypocrite and they kill prophets, and to repeat all the same story that you can find in, I think, in all anti-Semitic literature. One thing that happened in these last 3 years, if you look at about 200 different anti-Semitic blogs, and among these 200 different anti-Semitic blogs, you find out about 90% of them were created and launched in the last 3 years. I mean, after Ahmadinejad was elected as Iranian president. I think his rhetoric and his discourse really encouraged them to come into action and to organize themselves. And one thing they started to do in the last 18 months is started to create associations, what we call the birth of associations. And all of these associations are not based on anti-Semitism. I mean, only the reason of being is not anti-Semitism, but it's one of the key elements that has become the base of their ideology. It's one of them. It's called, if you look at the link, it's Palestine NGO blog. But if you read the Persian one, it's called Association of Anti-Zionism Bloggers. And one thing that I really like there is their symbol. Their symbol is a very soft one, it's a butterfly. And the slogan says, we are butterflies that fly against Zionism. And there is a group of people who came together and they have monthly meeting, and they say we discovered 70 other bloggers to 101 that think like us. So anti-Zionism, but if you look at what they write, it's completely anti-Semitism. And I think anti-Zionism for them and anti-Semitism are two different packaging with the same content. There's no difference for these people. And one of their founding members called resistance. And it's completely pro-Lebanese Hezbollah association. They translate a lot of Hezbollah news, and they want to launch in English version, but they haven't done yet. And they cover Hezbollah news, but at the same time they publish same stories about that the Holocaust was a fiction, the protocol of Zionism, or other stories. Al-Hamad and the previous one that I showed to you are very connected. They exchange links and they support each other. The third one is the oldest one. It's Muslim bloggers. It's the Association of Muslim Bloggers. It's the most open one between all of the three. It started about 1.5 years ago, and the members are very young, about 21, 22 years ago, 2 years old. When they started the association, they say that about 1,000 people wanted to join them, but because they wanted to remain anonymous, 900 of them resigned. I mean, it's very interesting that among people who support Islamic Republic and Islamic establishment, most of them prefer to blog in an anonymous way and don't publish their own names. Maybe because there are a lot of powerful forces within establishment that they prefer not to reveal their name. The Muslim bloggers' first post is really clear and talks about their ideology. It said, our first post is a cultural one, and we want to offer you a cultural story. And this cultural story is why Holocaust was a fiction. And they say we started the association of these Muslim bloggers to fight against secular bloggers, feminists, and student activists. We want to conquer the land of virtual war. And they're planning to launch, an English one, but I think it didn't work out. But they got some money, as I heard, to develop their associations. One of the persons who is very close to this association and who talks to them, delivered speech, Hamid advisor, Mr. Mohammed Ali Ramin, who was the main actor who planned the Holocaust conference and who is now a political so-called advisor, and usually is the main. He's considered as a mastermind of all this Holocaust denial and speeches on this subject. He has very close ties, according to his association, with them. One thing that maybe is very funny, but it's very tragic at the same time, that for these people, when they fight, not only Jewish population and Jews are enemies, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, enemies become Jewish too. It depends on the relation. For example, a minority like Baha'is, unrecognized minority in Iran, they are under pressure, and they call them that they are related to Jews. Freemasons are Jews. These two are normal things. You can hear that in other places. But the Wahhabis, the founding fathers of Saudi Arabia, and Muhammad Gaddafi became Jews at that time too. They just say that they have studied and found out that one of Gaddafi's ancestors is a Jew, and it's why he killed Imam Musa Sadr, the Lebanese Shiite leader, and he's a hidden Jew, according to many of them, and he just played the game, not to reveal his identity. And recently I found out that one of the is considered an Islamist philosopher. They call it that he was the philosopher of Islamic revolution. Finally, he took his distance regarding the Islamic Republic. He criticized that. And recently I read a few posts that they find out one of his grandfathers or grandmothers was Jewish too, and they found out why he started to take his distance regarding the Iranian Revolution, Islamic Republic. Among Iranians, of course, some say that Iranian Jewish population hide their family name, choose some strange family name that look like Islamic ones. It's for the reason that they are hidden ones, they are among us, they don't want to be covered. One of the parts that many of them really like are movies and cartoons. And by reading these stories, I went to the video club and I took some of these cartoons and I put them back and watched them back to find out if they are really strange things or not. Some of these bloggers and some of them have their monthly or weekly meeting to watch Hollywoodian movies and cartoons and to discuss about it. And really they analyze that. Maybe it's funny that if you read their blog, maybe there's an excuse to watch these movies. I don't know, maybe that. But you see that they, and at the same time, they promote their own products. I mean, at their blogs, we have this conference and we can find this movie there and this film there. At the same time, they started rejecting what they call the Jewish conspiracy in Hollywood. And it can be Polanski piano because the guy who the main character is a Jew and it's the oppressed one. It can be Harry Potter. They say Harry Potter promotes witchcraft. Christian and Muslims don't like witchcraft, like Jews really like it. And then the most interesting things that animated films, like Mickey Mouse, Tom and Jerry, Cinderella, and any cartoon, any animated film that talks about orphans, is something related to Israel and Jewish that they are, they didn't have any land, now they found the land, and all are related. Mickey Mouse is another story, and Tom and Jerry too, and they say Jews are considered as European considered the Jewish population as rats, and Walt Disney started to create Mickey Mouse to just give a positive image to rat, and when the rat gets a positive image, and the Jewish population gets a positive image, and Tom and Jerry's story is the same. And you laugh at it, but I watched a video film that in university, a professor in university talked about Tom and Jerry, same story, and the students were taking notes that it was the Tom and Jerry story, and they wanted, even if it was a mistake, he said Walt Disney created that. But it becomes, it's not really popular, but people talk about it. If they start something at university, I think it's a little bit less funny. Okay. Now the final product is cultural products or cartoons. They really emphasize on cartoons, and they say it's a very simple and efficient way to make connection with other people, rather to write and rather to make movies or video films, cartoons, and pass everywhere. This is concerning the Holocaust victims. Probably it comes from one of these Holocaust cartoon competition. Everybody was invited from all over the world to send us cartoons. And you have another one, same story. Third one, it was published in a conservative newspaper too. It says that you are free. We don't do anything with your pens now. You cut it. key problems? What about Palestine? Because most of these people, when they talk about Israel, the question is Palestine for justification or for saying that we want to defend defenseless and oppressed people. I think there are very different approaches to that. Some Islamist bloggers, including anti-Semitic ones, reject Hamas, are against it for different reasons. First, they call it Salafist ones, very close to Saudi Arabia. Other ones call it that, consider that they are not very faithful because they organize a symbolic funeral for Saddam Hussein, Iranian enemy. And some say that they have never condemned attacks to Shiite mosques and religious centers in Iraq. I think 50% of them reject any support for Hamas, but 100% of them share government support for Lebanese Hezbollah. But one question one of them raised is that our project is beyond the Palestine. Palestine, for some of them, is just a symbolic thing. It's a symbolic conflict or a symbolic problem that they can raise and they can support, but they don't really care about that. Some of the Iranian reformists started a few years ago to say that Palestinians should take care of Palestine and it's not anymore our problem, and the Iranian population should care of these great problems that every day face. I think this Palestinian question is not a part of issue for many Islamist bloggers, as a symbolic one, as they mention, as the South Lebanon coming symbolic. But what's the responsibility of Iranians based on this anti-Semitism? I think we should talk about it. I tell you about it, a project called Middle Youth, launched by a girl from Bahrain. It's called Israel Sharifi, 20-something. In this part, Iranians, Israelis, and Arabs contribute to society and write, and they don't shoot each other, even not virtually. And one issue that she emphasized on it is Baha'is right, minorities right. I asked her why you are so obsessed with Baha'is right. She told me that there are Muslims who repress them, and it's our responsibility to talk about it and to raise our voice. I think it's our Iranian responsibility, what Hamid said during these 3 years, that raise our voice, study Iranian anti-Semitism, talk about it, and communicate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we can have some questions now. Any other questions? Start. So
Yes.
How stable is the Jewish population in Iran?
Well, there are about 24,000 Jewish population in Iran.
24,000.
24,000. Before the revolution, there was about 120,000. And most of them, as you see, immigrated to the United States or to Israel, to other countries. And concerning of safety, recently there was a proposition that even they were paid to immigrate to Israel, and they rejected that. They said they want to stay in Iran. But I think more or less they are safe if you see the story. But in 1999, there were several of them, I think in Shiraz, were arrested. I mean, 6 or 7 of them. stayed for 2 years in jail and 2 or 3 years. And that was proven. I mean, there was allegation, accusation.
Some were killed at that time, right?
No, nobody was killed at that time. At the beginning of the revolution, a Jewish millionaire called Elvanian was executed. He was the first, non-official Iranian. He was not a politician, he was not in the military, he was a businessman. He was executed in 1979. He was accused of collaborating with Israel.
I'll ask a question. It's interesting. Today is the 25th anniversary of the attack in Lebanon on American soldiers and French soldiers. 241 American soldiers were killed and 58 French soldiers 25 years ago today. And it's interesting in a sense. I think soon after this attack, Reagan and the Americans left Lebanon. And some would argue that this ushered in an era of appeasement and maybe the revolutionary Iranian regime started to gain power and gain more and more power, and also thanks to, policy, Iran is now an empowered nation thanks to allies being two of Iran's greatest enemies. So my question is, given your expertise and your familiarity with the blogosphere and its connection to the opposition movement, you said that most of the sites are actually pro, not anti-regime. To what extent do you feel, or do you get a sense of the opposition movement in Iran? To what extent can they usher in some reform or even some serious change in the near future? And as David Menashe always says, there's two trains that have left the station in Tehran. One is the train of social change and governmental change and civil rights and that sort of change, and the other is the nuclear arms weapons program. And the nuclear program is moving faster. That train is moving faster than the social change train. What is your feeling of what's sort of happening on the ground?
I think social change happens step by step. It's a very slow process because we don't have really political parties in opposition. There are some groups, circles, even reforms are not that organized, if you want. And if you see student movements or women movements, they are there, they're alive, but they cannot change. If you see the reality, it's very good to see that workers or students claim their rights, and they are very brave people. Some face jail, and some leave country, some under pressure, and so on. But when you see up now, in last 3 years or last 5 years, I mean, concerning, for example, censorship or filtering, nothing changed. I'm not very.
Okay. So to follow up a little bit, to what extent do you feel it's difficult to ascertain that the Iranian population supports the nuclear weapons program by the Iranian regime? And that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, if Israel would attack surgically against the nuclear facilities, what do you think the reaction would be of the population?
First, I answered that before. Honestly, it's a very difficult question to ask, and whatever you answer, you just I mean, you cannot find a nation that likes to be attacked, but other nations and be bombed and houses destroyed, livestock lost. That's very But if you see different Iranian sides and blogs, including Iranian politicians or who were in government during Katan, during reformist time, they say cannot really judge that.
There's a recent book out by, who's a translator from
Yes.
who claims that the Ayatollah actually doesn't share the anti-Semitism that proposes, but and that at the end of his term will sort of go away and that won't be an issue. Is that right?
Which I don't deliver.
The term, yeah.
Well, no, I don't share the same attitude. I don't think Ahmadinejad was able to organize all these Holocaust conferences and so on without the approval of the.
That doesn't make any sense. So why has that book been promoted?
Maybe it's the writers, on idea. I didn't think that to give a positive image. But when Ahmadinejad, it was Ahmadinejad vice president, recently said that we are the friends of Israeli people. And there were all these discussions and debates in Iran. And finally, Iranian leaders said, no, we are not.
We have to believe that anti-Semitism grows when there are conditions of economic hardship, and we are trying hard to bring sanctions to bear against Iran to dissuade them from their nuclear program. If sanctions are increased, do you see an increase in the growth of anti-Semitism on the part of the general population?
I see it's not at all relevant to Iranian case. Because if you see, first, anti-Semitic ones is a very minority. And this minority, we sure that they have a lot of, I think, privileges, and that many people don't have. And they don't look at it, if you read different newspapers or websites, precisely, these sanctions, many people think that problem comes from Iranian government. Because they call it, sanctions, a torn of paper and resolutions, and they say it hasn't have any impact on us. I don't think it has anything. It's not going to have any impact.
Do the people in the blogging community fear a military strike by the United States or Israel if Iran doesn't stop its nuclear proliferation?
I think every rational person thinks that things become out of control and then there's a military attack. And the memory of Iran-Iraq war, 8 years, and it's still alive. It suffered, and Iran didn't get anything. Just suffered. Yes.
Are there any counter-bloggers to the anti-Semitic blogs?
Unfortunately not. You mean anti-Semitic watch, for example, and promote
Iranians that are blogging against this?
not really.
No. And also, is there any formal, are there madrasas or anything that teach?
As far as I know.
That would really my question. What is being taught in the schools about Judaism and anti-Semitism in the most schools and universities? Is anti-Semitism discussed at university level? Is Judaism discussed?
Not that much. Not that.
So it's just for the average person living there, it doesn't impact their lives.
No, but in universities sometimes, as I said, you see that some academics or so-called professors talking about Tom and Jerry story that was invented to give Jewish population a positive image. It's not really, it's systematic classic effort from universities part, but
in Iran that is about destroying Israel.
Yeah, I have a chart that says Ahmadinejad didn't invent anything. When even he got surprised, first time he talked about the destruction of Israel, he saw all these reactions, and he really got surprised and said, everybody talked about it for 25 years, and now everybody attacked me. Why? And then he get enjoying fame and popularity and celebrity, and he continued this way. But if you walk in Tehran or many cities streets, you can find slogans that exactly destroy and so on. And then they just absolutely didn't invent it.
Anybody else have a question?
Are any of the ones in English?
Yeah, there are not many, but there are a few.
So if you wanted to go into something to read the English, which was you go into? Do the names themselves?
I can send you by email if you want. And you can go to globalvoicesonline.org. I don't make it publicity about it, but it's a place globalvoicesonline.org. And it has evaluation edition and final. It's translated into English.
Does the government know all the laws that they are in the country, and do they act against you?
Well, first, many of them are pen names, they're anonymous bloggers. It's difficult to find them. Sometimes they know them, but they tolerate it. For example, at present,